So yeah, we're going to talk a little about becoming an entrepreneur and the approach that I think about a lot. So I should tell you who I am. Startup and enterprise consultant with John Morris. And so I work with the team that supports student startups. And we're based in the Student Life Building. So when you walk in, if you look up to your left, you'll see a room called the Startup Hub, and that's actually where we're sitting right now. And so if you have a startup idea, if you have a business idea that you want to pursue, you just come to us and we help you do it. And it really doesn't matter what it is. Like if it's something that you're thinking, I just want to do a side hustle, something on the side that you're interested in, that's fine. If you want to start a big business, that's fine. If you want to be a freelancer, we support pretty much everything. And so that's my role. I do a few other things at the university as well. I joined the staff here about 18 months ago. And before I did that, the job I had before, I ran my own company for about 13 years. And I had started a company actually about 20 years ago as well, when I was still in the United States. And so entrepreneurship has always been kind of a big part of my professional journey. And even some of the companies I worked for, my first kind of real job was in hotel management. I was working with a startup hotel chain in the United States with a terrible name called AmeriHost Inns. So I really find entrepreneurship was a great way to make money. It was a great way to spend every day. I always felt like I was getting up and thinking about things that excited me and interested me. And that was one of the great things about being somebody who owned their own business, is like it was you and it was what you're passionate about, and it was very energizing. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about what entrepreneurs do. And we had kind of interesting conversation this morning in the Startup Hub. We're talking about like the books we may have read when we were in school. And these were two of the ones that came up, Pride and Prejudice and Lord of the Rings. And just out of curiosity, have you read these? Or in the case of both of them, have you seen the movies at least? Who have seen these or know them well enough? Jenny, have you read these?
I've definitely seen the movies. I don't think I've read them, but I've definitely seen the movies.
Okay. Anybody else? You've got to be stories you're familiar with, right? So entrepreneurship is very much like every entrepreneur has a story, right? And every kind of product or every business you think about when you think about entrepreneurs, there is a story, a narrative that they build around that product or service. And it's always that way. And they're always kind of telling the same story. So I'm going to take Lord of the Rings because I'm really big fan. I read those when I was a boy. I think I was probably maybe 12 when I read them. So that would have been like 1978. And I kind of felt like they were like the first real book I read, right? I'd always read, Encyclopedia Brown kid stuff before then. And then Lord of the Rings was like my first serious book. And Lord of the Rings tells kind of an entrepreneurial story. And it's this story. It's something that isn't good that becomes good. And that's every entrepreneurial story. Every product kind of tells that story. Every service you buy, every shop that you shop in, they're kind of telling this story. Before us, it wasn't very good. And now things are better or good. And it's clearly the story of Lord of the Rings. So this is, if you're familiar with the story, that's like Mordor on the left. That's the bad place that Sauron's trying to turn the world into. Not very cool, kind of dark, no clubs, nothing to do that's fun. And on the right is Hobbiton, which is beautiful. It's like a garden, which, by the way, I've been to. It's in New Zealand. It's where they filmed. And it looks exactly like that. It doesn't really look like a movie set. It looks like if hobbits had moved into your neighborhood and turned your neighborhood into a garden, that's what you'd have. It's really, really beautiful. And that's really the Lord of the Rings story, but lots of stories are that way. Pride and Prejudice stories that way. It's always moving something that wasn't very good into something that's much, much better. And that's the story of entrepreneurship. And so one of the things we really kind of ask our entrepreneurs to do now is to kind of think about the story. You have an idea, I'm assuming you do because you're here, and that idea is changing something from what's not very good to what's much, much better. It's changing the conditions in a person's life. Last week, I spoke to some of your colleagues, some of your student colleagues, in a program called Positive Psychology. So it's a postgraduate program. And positive psychology is kind of this a newish way of thinking about psychology. And it kind of is like, what mindfulness is, or, positive thinking, things like that, wellness. It's a branch of psychological studies that kind of focuses on that, right? And many people who study positive psychology, they will go and establish their own practice, right? They will be won't be a positive psychologist because can't quite call themselves that unless they're a licensed psychologist, but they'll be a positive psychology practitioner. And the benefit it brings to people, because we had this kind of robust conversation, is like if I have imposter syndrome, like I work at a university, I'm not really a university person, I'm surrounded by all these PhDs, feel like I have imposter syndrome. Positive psychology can help me with that, help me deal with that, help me deal with the voices in my head or whatever that tells me that I shouldn't be doing this. And that is a real benefit to people, right? It moves them from a position that's not very good to something that's much, much better. And that's what you're trying to do as an entrepreneur. And it's really kind of important to think about that in a lot of detail. So when we talk about, these are some of my examples of brands actually that you may know that you can kind of frame in that not very good to good. Like I'm a big fan of Apple Computer. I've used them since I was at university. So this was been about 1988 when I got my first Apple, which was an OS 2. And it looked like it was tiny. It was really kind of cute, actually. And kind of moved into other Apple products. And I really, really love them. And I can think about the way that, say, my watch makes things better for me. It tracks my health. It tracks my steps. I can, when my Ring doorbell goes off, I can see who's my door, all this kind of stuff. And it really kind of has that not very things that didn't know I needed an Apple Watch, but now that I have one, I think it's pretty great. I love Taco Bell. I absolutely love Taco Bell. Do you love Taco Bell, Sally? You should go. There's one down the road. They're really nice. I've always loved Taco Bell since I was a kid. I could talk about how that makes my life better. And NutriTrack, by the way, is an app, and it's one of those apps that you can track your calories. And I'm kind of sensitive to that right now. I'm trying to lose some weight, and so NutriTrack really makes things better for me because I'm no longer guessing how many calories I take in a day. I can track it on that app, and it works pretty well. So the first question then, if you come to me and say, look, I've got this idea and I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to kind of build a business around this idea, is we want to understand how well you know the problem. It starts with an expertise in problems. It's something I repeat a lot, but it's absolutely true. Be an expert on the problem. Be an expert on what problem people are trying to solve with whatever it is that you're creating for them. If you can become an expert on the problem, then the solution becomes a couple things. The solution becomes easier to build or easier to create, and it's easier to explain the solution to people that you want to be your customers. And really that's what sales is. Sales is understanding somebody else's problem and letting them know in pretty clear terms that you can solve it for them. So one of my favorite quotes, if I had 20 days to solve a problem, I'd take 19 days to define it. I think it's probably apocryphal. I'm not sure if Albert Einstein really said that, but it doesn't matter because I think it's probably right. If you have a problem, and if you really clearly understand the problem, then the solution itself becomes easier to make and becomes easier to sell. And that's kind of the big part of entrepreneurship. So as you think about your story, when we get done, if you want to talk about your story, this is where we're going to start first. We're going to talk about the problem that you solve. So if we go back to Middle Earth, the next question is, who has the problem, right? And this is when we talk an awful lot about market size, things like that when we talk about entrepreneurship. But really, what we're talking about are people. We're talking about people. Sometimes they're in a place, sometimes they're in a country, sometimes they're everywhere in the world. But how many of those people are out there that you know have the problem? And that's it. So people talk about market a lot, but it's just the number of people that have the problem that you solve, and really the number of people that you can reach with what you do. So if you're a barber, I go to Boo & Co. down in the docks, right? Problem, hair grows. Solution, you go to a barber. but you can't really move that barbershop around. You can expand, right? You can open up new locations and things like that. But a sole barber is kind of limited to the space they're in. They're not kind of limited, they're limited to the space they're in. And those are the kind of questions that we'd ask you next. And we'd also ask you a little bit about, by the way, so this is a Middle Earth. So if you're trying to defeat Sauron and you're pitching to the dragons of Dragon's Den, and they asked you how many people had the problem, Sauron problem, everybody did, like, because he wanted to conquer the world. And when you look at problems, now this is a tool, sorry. This is the tool that you can download from a really cool website called Board of Innovation. So if you have any innovation assignments, like if you're asked to do something in your class, go to them because there's some great templates that you can use and it's all free. So Board of Innovation has you kind of think about the people that you solve problems for in terms of personas. So if a friend of mine has a pet sitting business in the States, right? So he could talk about the persona of the person that he solves problems for. So first, they're pet owners, right? Probably dogs. Cats are a little bit easier to take care of, but they can be anything. They can be fish, they can be birds, or whatever. He would think about the demographics of those animal owners in the community that he works. It's going to be very community focused. He can't travel that far and run a business that's profitable. So he'd think about, here's the people in my community that own pets, and they tend to be 18 to 40 or 25 to 50. They tend to be college educated. Maybe they're not university educated. Here's where they are in my community. This seems to be the market in which I could reach reasonably to serve those people. I don't want to drive 2 hours to walk a dog, but I would drive 30 minutes to walk a dog. Those are the kind of questions you ask. And you're thinking about who these people are, right? They are people that probably have a little bit of extra income because they want to spend it on a dog walker, or some people can't do that. And you can create in your mind a picture of the person that you sell to, and you can start thinking about their pain. I have a cat, right? And he's pretty low maintenance, actually. He kind of takes care of himself. But if we have to go away for a weekend, my wife and I, that's kind of a problem we have, right? We have to figure out how we make sure that his name's Nuggie, how Nuggie gets fed, for instance, who cleans up the litter tray, and so on. So that's a problem we have to solve. We could solve it by hiring my friend if he were in Liverpool, not in the States. Sometimes you think about the jobs people need to do. The positive psychologist might work with somebody like me or some of my colleagues to say how they can think about their job better, how they can deal with stress better so they're more productive, those kind of things. And then around that, you kind of create a story. You create a narrative about how you solve their problem in a way, and it literally is a story. It's you kind of talking about, here's things that we see, and here's the problems that we see, and here's the solutions that we created for the people that we know have the problem. I'll give you an example. There's a company in South America that I can't really say I worked with. I talked to her, the founder, a couple of times, and introduced her to some of my friends in the United States that could help her. And it's called a Lab for You. Lab is laboratory, and number 4 in the letter U. And how she saw the problem. Her name's Komal Dadlani, the founder. So she lived in Chile, kind of grew up in and around Santiago, but originally from India. And she was an educator. She was a science educator. And a lot of people would like to see more students study science, STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. And she thinks so too, because she's a scientist, right? And she's really enthusiastic about science, like to work with kids around science. And what she learned was, as she kind of went to schools and tried to understand what was happening in South America, Central America, is that they weren't really teaching certain sciences, particularly physics, because physics is really hard to teach unless you have a physics lab, unless you have tools that you could show how physics works. And as she was thinking about that problem, and it is a problem, when kids learn physics, she realized that you could take your smartphone, your iPhone and turn it into a physics lab if you wrote the right program, because it has an accelerometer, it can tell barometric pressure, it has GPS, it has a camera. There's all these kind of things. If you just tweaked your phone a little bit with an app, it would turn it into a physics lab, and that's what she did. And now all of a sudden, this problem of can't teach physics, they don't have a lab, is if you have a smartphone, you now have a lab. And all you need is one, but you have several, you can teach more kids. And her company's done amazing. It's grown throughout Latin America, it's grown into the United States, all because she really kind of understood there was this problem, the physics labs, and that she could tell a story around it. Like, we think education is important. We think science education is important. We want kids to be enthusiastic about it. We can make them enthusiastic if they have fun doing it. We can create an app that help them have fun, but also teach physics. Would that be a good idea? And as it is, it's a really, really good idea. It's a great company. I think she's wonderful. She's a great job with that company. And so that's really kind of the stories. And finally, it's a context. Like, the context is really important. It's like where people are in their lives, where the economy is, and so on. It's all the other things out there that affect the ability of a person to launch a company. So, as one of the groups I work with pretty closely in John Moore's is people in film, and there's a really good context here because Liverpool hosts a lot of productions, a lot of film productions. And so if you're in film, Liverpool's a good context. And so those are kind of the next step we'd ask you to. So as you're telling your story, you're talking about your problem, you're talking about your solution, and you're talking about people. And these are the people whose lives we can make better if they engage us. By the way, if you go back, that persona tool you can download at that link. So I recommend Board of Innovation. And then you kind of think a little bit more about the market. If you sell pizza, that's a lot of pizza eaters out there. I am one. If you sell McLarens, there's not that many people that can afford a McLaren. And then the next thing you would say is this: with a big market, there's also a lot of competition for the pizza eating market out there. So you kind of become aware of who are the other people that do what you do. And then if it's a small market, like McLaren buyers, it's a small group of customers. So there's less supercar makers, but there's less customers as well. So those are kind of how you think about market size and competition, things like that. Then the last thing we would talk about, so once we have problem, once we have solution, once we have market, we talk about the things you need to do to get your company off the ground. And these are really kind of the four big ones. The first one is all the things you need to do to make the thing that you're making, the business you're making. Mine was a consultancy. So I would do research, I would do some publishing, I did some content marketing, wasn't very good at that. But mainly what I did was I kind of looked at trends within entrepreneurship, and I would create programs for those trends. And I would keep myself up to date on what was going on in the world. Now, my market tended to be international. I did a lot of work in the Middle East. And so it was very important for me to understand, if I were working, say, in the Palestinian territories, which I did a fair amount of work in, what was going on in the Palestinian territories, both politically, which is not very good, and economically, which has its challenge. And so the program we created was to help entrepreneurs their export. So what those dynamics look like. And that was really what I had to do. It's a lot of research, really. And then the next thing I had to think about is how I got customers. Sometimes it's marketing. You may have a marketing product that's very oriented toward marketing. A lot of times it's network. It's like getting out there, getting your name out there, meeting people, and so on. One of the things we're going to be doing next year is spending a little bit more time with LJMU students and getting them to network in the community here. I think it's important. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. I will tell you that I'm not always comfortable networking. I got a big one to go to tomorrow. But that's okay. Like, you can do it and not be comfortable. And sometimes the more you do it, the better you get. But how you get customers becomes just kind of a process, really. Is it marketing? Is it sales? What is it? And then there's all the other stuff you do to run the business. If you have people, you have to pay them. How do you pay your taxes? This is actually pretty straightforward stuff. How do you deliver products and services? How do you make sure customers are happy? How do you follow up with customers? How do you build customer service and all those things? And then the last bit is, I think, the most important bit for entrepreneurs, is how do they stay happy? Because entrepreneurship is, I was actually just talking about this. Like, I loved it, and I would happily go back to running my own business. It was just a great way to live. I really, really loved it, but it was also really stressful. And I would say that my stress at John Moore's is a lot less. There's definitely stress here, but my stress was more, I'm not making any money. How am I going to pay my bills stress? And that's pretty high stress. And so one of the things I learned in the years I was running the business is that it was really important for me to take care of myself and just not take care of my mental health, my physical health, stay happy, make sure I take time out, because it's easy not to. It's easy to kind of get wrapped up in the business. And one of the real keys of being an entrepreneur is make sure you build a business that works for you in your life. And that's something we stress at the club as well. The thing about all those business systems, getting customers, see you later. Getting customers, building the thing that you're building, running the business, that actually is the last thing that we would work on. The first thing would be problem and solution. And then, do you have a big enough market? Those are more important than the actual business. The 4 things on the right there, that's just activity, right? That's just things you do over and over again. It's not a lot of thought. It's really, really getting and making sure that you've created something that people love. And if they do, you have a really good chance to be successful. Okay, this is a picture of the Startup Hub. So you come and find us. And this is what we do. We do drop-ins. We're doing a drop-in right now with me and my colleague, Sally. We have a number of different other programs. Like, actually, this is a little bit dated because we're going to change it starting in the fall. For those of you who have graduated, and I think there's at least one of you have, we will work with you for 5 years. So just kind of get the email address on the last page and send us an email. We'll make sure you can work with us. So this is not just for students. That's where our information is. And this is our email address. And I'll make sure you get these slides, but it's recorded too, but I'll send these slides out to you.